And y'all are gonna make Paul Finebaum lose whatever hair he's got left. He's not got a lot. He's not got a lot. Discussion earlier this week on if Alabama beats Georgia, would the SEC be left out? I think everybody's heard me talk enough about this. It's my opinion that Georgia will beat Alabama. This is a non-discussion, but this is what we do. We waste bandwidth on these topics. Welcome to another 10 minutes of that. Paul has this to say. He says, over my dead body, that's not happening. I'm not going to allow it. What I do know is that the SEC is the best conference. You're going to tell me that Florida State, without its best player, should be in over Alabama or Georgia? That is preposterous. He's right. He's right a lot more than folks give him credit for being. But look, the SEC, there's a lot of different scenarios that can happen on Saturday. My opinion is that Michigan is already in no matter what happens with them in Iowa, but we're going to see about that, okay? I have a pretty strong take that Georgia's probably in already too, but that's not as obvious, I don't think, although I do think people are coming to my side on that. There is no world right now, like zero gravity, Mars, wherever, there is no world that Florida State is better than Alabama or Georgia right now. Doesn't matter who wins on Saturday or if Florida State wins or not on Saturday. Just they're not. They're not better. Okay, we just saw what happened with Florida State, sort of eking out a win over a Florida team which plays in the SEC that has a losing record. I mean, they narrowly won that game. Now Georgia narrowly beat Auburn earlier this year. Alabama narrowly beat Auburn earlier this year. So maybe, in all three of those scenarios, those are road games with huge rivalry games. What explains Florida State's performance during the season against Boston College? That's not a rivalry game. What explains their performance playing into overtime with an 8-4 Clemson team? I mean, it doesn't take long to see. All you got to do is use your eyes. And honorable people can disagree about who's better, but there's no world where Florida State is better than Alabama and Georgia. Odds makers would probably, I don't know what they would have the Bama game, but certainly Georgia would be a double-digit favorite over Florida State. And no matter the outcome of the game Saturday, that does not change. Now, is this the most deserving four? Or is this about the best four? Because I'm not sure that those are necessarily the same thing. If this is only about conference championships, then why does Notre Dame ever get in, or why did they? So 2008 strikes again. I think in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. I mean, we've had a lot of non-conference champions go on and play in the college football playoff. In fact, I think we've had maybe not. No, we did. So in the last 3 college football playoffs, we've had a non-champion play in the college football playoff. It's just what it is. Make sure you're taking advantage of this. We've got a couple of DAWGSTRUCTIONs left with Kelee Ringo's signature. We'll run out of these, I'm assuming, this holiday season. If you want a Christmas gift, that's awesome. From our buddy Kelee Ringo, you can get that. The link is right down below. Take advantage of that today before I run out. I'm about to run out of Stetson Bennett stuff, but we'll talk about that on some other video. I think Paul has a job. He works for the SEC Network, which is Disney, which is in partnership, obviously, with the Southeastern Conference. I was listening to Yogi. Golly, now I forgot Yogi's last name. He's a Big 12, a very large Pac-12 honk, and he was making the argument about the big bad SEC. Listen, it sounds great when you're saying it, and I know his role with the Pac-12 is the same as Paul's with the SEC, except Paul is better at it, I guess, and his league is continuing. But the notion that someone that a conference is better than the SEC, and the way that the dismissiveness of calling it the big bad SEC, what I would say to Yogi Roth is, hey, listen, it's great that you are making that argument. I understand it's to your benefit for making it. It doesn't hold water at all. The Pac-12 has 2 excellent teams. One of them can win the national championship, Oregon. The other one is a team that has just great college quarterback and is surviving right now. I don't know that they'll survive Oregon, but the Ducks have a real chance to win the national championship. The winner of that game will go in. The loser of the game will not. There's no world where the loser of the Pac-12 championship is going to go play in the college football playoff. That just won't happen. That is the loser is out. So Ohio State I think can still get in. I really don't. I mean, but they're in the same boat as the loser of the Pac-12, which is non-existent really. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And to which people say, why is it fair for 12-1 Alabama or 12-1 Georgia or 12-1 Georgia or 12-1 Alabama to get in? Because they're playing the most complicated schedules out there. Okay, when you're starting to talk about the SEC, I mean, look at Georgia's schedule, right? They look at the results speak for themselves too. What team has 2 wins over top 11 teams right now? There are 2 people, if my math's correct. It's Georgia and Michigan. UW doesn't have that. They have a win over Oregon. That's it. They do not have a win over anybody else that matters because there's not a lot of great teams out there. They're good. The Pac-12 is better than it was, but the story of the Pac-12 is better than reality, I guess you could say. So in the top 11, you've got Michigan with wins over Ohio State and Penn State. You've got Georgia with wins over Missouri and Ole Miss. After that, Washington, they have a win over Oregon. Florida State, they don't have a win until LSU at 13. So same thing with, I'll keep going down the line. Oregon, they do not have a win. I don't think in the top 20, they have a win over Oregon State, and I think that's it. Someone else can correct me. But there's not 2 in the top 11. Ohio State has a win over Penn State. Texas has a win over Alabama. Alabama does not have a win until you get to Ole Miss. Missouri does not have a win until you get to Tennessee, maybe at 21, something like that, because they lost to LSU. And then obviously Penn State does not have a win. But I think, I would have Ole Miss at my 10 rather than Penn State, but I wouldn't have Oklahoma at 12 either. But this is me. I'd have Arizona probably higher than Oklahoma. I would probably have Notre Dame higher than Oklahoma, but whatever. So all of these leagues are not created equally. Now I know that that's kind of hard to admit, particularly when you're working for the leagues, but I don't, so I don't care, right? I mean, people say, well, you're just like a homer for Georgia or the SEC. You gotta watch. I mean, that's laughable. Pay attention would be what I would say, but I don't see a scenario. First of all, because I think Georgia's probably going to win this game the same way I think that Michigan's going to win their game, same way Oregon's going to win their game, Texas will win theirs, and likely Florida State will win theirs. Likely, not certainly. But I think it's all too somewhat circumstantial. I mean, how do those teams win? Is UW and Oregon a really tight fight? Is it does it come down to the last play of the game like it did in middle October? I mean, Oregon should have never lost that game to begin with. Let's just be honest. But they did, and it's hurt them ever since. But it's irrelevant now. So I think that I find it very hard to believe that Michigan loses on Saturday. B, I find it very hard to believe if Michigan loses that they're out anyway. I mean, I think they'd just be the 4, and that's all there is to it. I mean, who's going to replace them? You're telling me now. Ryan made the argument last night, and I don't know that he's wrong, but you're telling me that a loss to Iowa is better than a loss to Alabama? Of course not. But I don't know if Michigan's one of the top 4 teams in the country. I think they are. But I don't know that one result. I think what Paul is saying is right. He's saying, over my dead body, that's not happening. I'm not going to allow it. I think he's right, frankly. I don't know any scenario where someone other than Georgia and Bama are quite clearly the better team. I think it's more of a case with Georgia, frankly, than Alabama, because Alabama's has more struggles this season than the Dogs have. But I think that it's pretty clear that both these teams are better than a lot of their peers surrounding them, and we're just going to have to see what the committee decides to do. It is time to go to 12, for sure. I mean, I think that it's time, and I think the sooner we get to that moment in time, the better. And this is a good. We got Paul Finebaum saying he's not going to allow things to happen, which I know is hyperbole, but still, I think it's time for an expansion. It's a little bit unfortunate. Kirk Herbstreit was about to lose it Tuesday night, talking about how bad the semifinals have been, and they were very good in 20. What was that? 2022, I guess. Yeah, it was 2022. Often those games are in 2023, but whatever. Those were superb games. They were outstanding. But most of the semifinals, think about LSU, Oklahoma. Think about Alabama, Notre Dame. Think about Georgia, Michigan, or whatever. There's been some pretty nasty blowouts in these semifinal games. I mean, I can think of Clemson, Ohio State. That Clemson won, and I think a year later or 2 years later, I mean, Ohio State took them to the woodshed. And then you think about there's been a lot of not very competitive games. Michigan State, Alabama. It's just not been good. I mean, even when Alabama played Ohio State, they got blown out in 14, or modified slow motion road out, blown out, whatever you want to call it. They got beat pretty good. So I don't think what Paul is talking about is going to happen, but mainly because I think Georgia's going to beat them. But the notion that Florida State is better than Bama or Georgia, or that the loser of the Pac-12 championship game. I mean, sometimes we got to be a little bit more honest with our audience and stuff like that.